treatments such as counseling, lightbox therapy, or medication. Sometimes we feel bad in the fall and winter anyway, especially during the holidays. But if a mood slump continues for days or weeks, don't wait. Talk with your doctor or counselor for more information and support.
HCAM programming is supported by our viewers
and by WPC Pest Control, a family-owned business for over 35 years. Owners Jim and Rebecca Mazzucchelli provide honesty, respect, and integrity, performing safe and effective pest control services. They service your home like it's their home, because when you have kids, you know what families want, a safe, pest-free home.
And by Golden Pond Assisted Living, honoring resident choice, dignity, and independence. Our health and wellness focus keeps residents active. Golden Pond, state-of-the-art senior housing and healthcare services.
You're watching HCAM TV, and for more Hopkinton, visit HCAM Ed.
Through the chair, you're live on HCAM TV.
All right, we ready to get started? Good evening, everyone. This is the Zoning Advisory Committee meeting, Monday, October 24th, 2002. I'm calling the meeting to order. So first off, my name is Rachel Rawson. I'm the Zoning Advisory Committee co-chair. My other co-chair is here today, is Ted Barker Hook. I'll be leading this meeting today. So let me confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Please respond when I call your name. Ron Foisey?
here.
Mary Larson Marlowe?
Here.
John Catino? Not present. Nisha Nanawari? Not present. Madhu Chandrasekhar? Not present. Elise Mielowski?
Here.
Curtis Smithson?
Here.
Anyone I missed?
Ted Barker Hook is here.
Ted Barker Hook. Okay, staff, when I call your name, please respond. John Gelsich?
Present.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Good evening, everyone. The open meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. The act includes an extension until March 31st, 2023. The new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate, alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body, instead of holding meetings in a place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio, or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of the body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirements that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remain suspended. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference with Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the ZAC agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may be broadcast on HCAM through one or many of its channels or platforms. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. we ready for the agenda? Okay. So, John, the agenda tonight is starting with public comments. Public
Yep.
commentary, is that right?
The agenda starts with the public forum. So I think Ted had reached out to Gary, the planning board chair, and he was going to say something first, but then however you want to handle it, you can do that and then do the public forum or however.
Okay, I'm happy to recognize well, so do I need to have a motion to open the public forum then, John?
No, so Zach is, sorry, everybody, this is technical issues of a new chair. Zach is not a hearing board, so none of these things are statutorily required. So we can kind of go about it as we want. It's just the votes themselves need to be recorded with roll call votes. So opening the public forum is not something you need to vote on. Closing the public forum is not something you need to vote on. You can just recognize the public as they come up.
Okay, I'm happy to recognize Gary Trendle, then the chair of the planning board for Hopkinton, if he's on.
Hi, thank you, Madam
Hello.
Chair. And appreciate both you and Mr. Barker Hook for inviting me this evening. And this is always an interesting meeting because it's a great opportunity for the public to provide some input on various initiatives or ideas that they might have. So I think this is a pretty seasoned group, and we have two former chairs on the committee, and both Rachel and Ted have been I think very involved along the way, which I think makes this a really strong zoning advisory committee. And I just want to make sure that folks from home, people in the public realize how important the zoning advisory committee is to the planning board. I think when functioning well, we work hand in hand. While the planning board is proposing amendments at town meetings, Zach is really the brains behind it, and the planning board relies on the zoning advisory committee to flush out the details and really get into the weeds and make sure that what we're proposing is sound and has the best interests of the town behind it. And I think while the planning board has a lot of governance responsibility, particularly with regards to hearings and proposals and whatnot, Zach has a lot more freedom to really to work on initiatives that are most important to this group, and that makes it a pretty cool committee or board to serve on, because you do have a lot of freedom in how you go about working. I just have a couple of quick things that I want to ask of the board or ask of the committee, and these are things that I'm a former member of Zach and have been on planning board for 4.5 years or so now. And these goes without saying, and I think you'll all do this, but I'd be mad at myself if I didn't say it. But first and foremost, really encourage everyone to keep the broader interests of the town first and at the forefront. And all of us have reasons to be here. In most cases, we've had some type of, not in most cases, but in many cases, there's probably something that's sort of wound us up or set us off a little bit. And it's important because that brings passion, but it's easy to get hung up in some of the things that the perspective of your friends and your peers and whatnot. And as a board, we should really be putting the interests of the town first. I think the second piece is, whatever this board comes forward with in time for town meeting, we do have to go, if it's a zoning change, it requires 2/3 majority. So it's really important to listen along the way and to kind of be creative and finding ways to advance a subject in a way that the town can get behind, because it really doesn't matter what Zach thinks or what the planning board thinks. It's all going to go through town meeting in the end. And then my third comment is just a reminder that you'll get what you put into it. And, I think you'll probably hear tonight and hopefully some good discussion about some big ideas that could make a pretty significant impact for Hopkinton. Those take more work and they're harder to do. And I don't want to discourage that, because that's also, I think, where, all of us as volunteers want to impact the town as favorably and as best we can. But, and I think case in point, a few years ago with the revised ground-mounted commercial solar overlay, I think that's a great example of something that has put the town in a much, much stronger position. And I think that really was the work of Zach and of Mary in particular. So I don't, it's easy to sort of knock off the little things. To me, a perfect combination is to maybe have one big thing and then a couple of smaller updates to go along with it. But just want to remind people that, the opportunity here is as much as all of us collectively are willing to put into it. So that's my 2 cents, or my 5 minutes here. I've got a few topics of interest that I'd like Zach to consider, but I'm going to hold off a little while and give some other folks a chance to share their perspective. So thank you, Madam Chair, for having me, and I will. I'm going to try to be play a more active role in at least listening in on Zach this year. So look forward to seeing how things progress through the next couple of months.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you for opening comments. Appreciate that. All right, so John, we're heading over to the public forum. It should probably be one person at a time. Do you want me to call on someone, or can people raise their hand?
Yeah, so people can use the raise hand function. If you don't know how to do that, I believe it's in the participants section, unless it's moved, or you can just unmute yourself and call out that you have a comment.
It's in the reactions tab.
Thank you, Ron. It has moved. So Rachel, if you can't see anybody, I can tell you who's raising their hand.
No, I can see Nicole Simpson's raised her hand. So Nicole, would you like to provide some comments?
Sure. Yeah, I will go ahead and do that. So hi, my name is Nicole Simpson. I live at 16 Ledgestone Drive. And I would like to comment on zoning for electric vehicle chargers at multifamily housing. And I know there will be discussion later about EV charging at businesses and municipal lots, which I fully support, but I think this would be an important complement to that. So the reason I bring this up is because it is critical to the environment that we have a rapid transition off of fossil fuels. And it's important to me that this be done in an equitable way that doesn't leave anyone behind due to less access or resources. I bought an EV a little over a year ago, and I see the many benefits for low operation costs, less maintenance, community health, and for the planet. And with more EV options on the market and new federal and state incentives, including for used electric cars, it will be even more accessible to low and moderate income residents going forward. And per the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, there are currently 50,000 EVs in Massachusetts with a target of 200,000 in 2025, 900,000 in 2030. And by 2035, all new vehicles sold in Massachusetts will be electric. So in a town like Hopkinton, where most transportation is by personal vehicle, supporting the transition to electric vehicles will have a significant impact in reducing local carbon emissions. Of course, you can't talk about EVs without thinking about charging. So there are 3 levels of charging, and level 2 is the one that is most appropriate for residential use. It requires 240 volts of power access and supplies the car with about 25 miles an hour of range when it's charging. And charging is most commonly done overnight at home, so the driver doesn't need to go out of their way and wait for the car to fully charge. It just happens while they're at home and the car is parked there. So for single unit homeowners, adding EV charging is relatively straightforward. Of course, it comes with a cost, but as long as there's sufficient electrical supply available in the electrical panel, a homeowner could do that. But for multi-unit housing owners and renters, it may not be as practical to individually add charging capability if they are parking in a shared lot, even if they have a dedicated space. So going forward, I believe that all new multi-unit housing should be required to include some community EV charging capacity. So planning for it now would avoid later retrofits. It would remove barriers for people of any housing type to be able to switch to an EV for transportation. It would enable strategic planning so it can be safely placed where there won't be cables crossing walkways. And the investment in a charger would then be available to multiple residents in the community. So that's my comment. Thanks for the time, and I appreciate being able to provide input to this committee.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Thanks so much for your comments and joining us. Who would like to go next? I see Chuck Joseph, are you on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Would you like to go next? I can.
Sure. Thank you,
ahead.
Madam Chairman. I'm speaking today as a private citizen, but also this notion has come out of multiple conversations with the Economic Development Committee. One of the things, and also because I work in real estate in the community and have for almost approaching 40 years, we're facing a real affordable housing crisis, as most people are aware. And suburbs are real challenging places in which to construct or convert homes into what we would term as affordable units. And one of the things that has come about in our industry, and we see happening nationally now, is the increased interest in ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And Hopkinton actually has a pretty robust ADU bylaw that I know I engage in multiple conversations every week with people that are kind of trying to consider how to help their loved ones or people they know, or somehow afford housing in today's marketplace, and it's a challenge. So while I introduced to them the idea of ADUs, the challenge really is the size that Hopkinton allows, in my opinion. We allow ADUs up to 800 square feet. And we also allow up to 3 people to occupy an ADU. So it's a challenge in that I think we need it. I think the ADUs would become much more prevalent and much more capable of addressing affordable housing issues if we were to increase that to 1,200 square feet. I don't think 1,200 is an extraordinarily large building. I think our duplex bylaw allows for 1,800 square feet. So I think it's a very reasonable size. And the reason that I'm really bringing it forward, when I have these conversations with people, they always think about parents helping kids, or kids bringing in an elderly parent, or something along those lines. But I think it's a mistake to stay really restricted in what we think of as family units and relationships that could benefit from the ADUs. There are so many different types of family units out there now that could benefit from this. Even, elderly siblings where one of them is in a tough situation and needs housing. There's a million of them that I have sitting across the kitchen table from lots of people. And I really would encourage Zach to at least consider this. I think it would be a benefit to our community. We're not talking about changing anything else about the bylaw. We're not making any other changes other than let's just consider a slightly larger unit.
Through the chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So,
Mary.
Chuck, when we discussed this in the past, and actually when we went through the changes to the ADU a couple of years ago, there was pushback from certain segments of the town, just concern about it turning into a lot of rental units rather than really, and I don't, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering, if you have any suggestions in terms of how to reassure people, or even, whether or not that is something to be concerned about, from your perspective. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that this is I think it's a good idea for us to bring this up. I'm no question about that. And I do really think we need to continue to address the housing crisis in any way we can. Maybe that aspect will help convince people, but I'm just wondering if you have any insight on that.
Sure. Through the chair again. Mary, the thing that strikes me about it is I do think it's an unfounded fear, but I recognize that it's going to come up in public discourse. That's just the way it is. I think if you look at the bylaw in detail, the bylaw does not pass with the property. The bylaw is given to an individual, and the individual has to apply and provide an affidavit that the person or people living in that in-law, that ADU rather, meet the criteria as set forth in the bylaw. And if they sell that house, and I have been in the position recently of selling, an ADU unit in Hopkinton, we have to let the buyer realize that they don't have an ADU unit until they apply for it and they get approved by the building inspector. And then further beyond the actual physical plant being approved, the individual occupant has to be approved as meeting the criteria, and they have to reapply every 2 years. So, is it an honor system? Yes, it is. Is it a challenge? If somebody is abusing it, then I think if someone else reported them, the building inspector would then come in and say, hey, you gotta show me you're not just using this thing as a two-family. And I think that's the only safeguard that I can think of, Mary, and I think the bylaw was well written in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Chuck, did you have any other comments before we move on? Anything about tree protection specifically?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Brief comments.
I'll let someone else jump in there, and if I have anything to say, I'd be happy to offer it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Chair recognizes Amy Groves.
Thank you. I am Amy Groves from 2 College Street, and I am a member of the Sustainable Green Committee, and also a member of the Climate Action subgroup of that committee. And I want to be respectful of open meeting laws here, so I just wanted to make an announcement for your awareness that we'll be contacting the chairs to request some time on your agenda at your earliest convenience. When we want to present to you what we're working on, because we think it has a lot to do with Zach. We are formulating a climate action plan for Hopkinton and an accompanying net zero resolution. So the net zero resolution sets a date by which Hopkinton is to achieve net zero carbon emissions. And the climate action plan tells us how we're going to do that. So we know it's feasible to get there by that date. So as you can see, it probably has a lot to do with Zach, but we don't want to commandeer your open meeting, your open segment with this. So we would like to get a time on your agenda whenever you can do that.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Appreciate the conversation, and we look forward to a joint meeting. That would be great.
Thanks.
Okay. Were there other people that wanted to speak? Linda Schuss, I don't know, did I mess up your name? Would you like to speak?
No, I'm also here from the Hopkinton Sustainable Green Committee. I'm interested in hearing about the chart. I'm here to listen to the charging discussion. Thank you, though.
Great, thank you. Okay. Paul Ostrander, would you like to speak at the public forum?
No, thank you. Just here, part of planning board. Thank you.
That's great. Fine. Welcome to Zach. Was there anyone Was there anyone else from the public that would like to provide some comments? Okay. Yes.
Sorry, this is Gary Trendle. Maybe now's a good time. I have a couple of comments, one from a planning board perspective and one from myself as a private citizen.
Great, thank you.
And again, Gary Trendle, 31 Chamberlain Street, chair of the planning board. From a planning board perspective, one topic, and I'm not sure if you've heard much about it, but we have some new requirements associated with being a MBTA community. And I think this is particularly relevant given conversation around affordable housing and with regards to providing some avenues for denser housing. So some of the comments made earlier, it's easy to get scared of dense housing, but I think that certainly there's a lot of advantages to it as well, particularly when it's done right. And we've had some initial conversations with the planning board with regards to the process and requirements for these MBTA communities. But as a planning board, we'd also like to partner with Zach as we flush out how to best go about approaching this challenge. Just for people's background, it's to summarize, we need to have zoning for 50 acres with 17 units per acre. And there's a lot of additional sort of fine details that John can get into more than I could, but you know, and what the state has done is they've tied some other funding sources to our ability to meet this requirement. So it's already resulted in some initial healthy dialogue among the planning board, but it's something that we're going to need to. We have some deadlines with regards to a plan to address it, and then we've got a little bit more time next year to build up more details. So that's my one from a planning board perspective. As a private citizen, you know, I know this committee has already done a lot of work on tree protection, and I'd love to see that opened up again. It's a hard one. It's tricky. It's messy, but I think many of us would agree that all too often more land is cleared than is necessary. And whether it be from a climate change, from a sustainability perspective, even from the building neighborhoods with character, trees, and particularly mature trees, can play a really, really important role there. So I'm hopeful that we can that you can open that up again. You know, maybe there's some creative ways to incentivize keeping more trees or disincentivizing clearing too many. But you know, I think that's one that's going to require some creativity and some thoughtfulness beyond what was already done, which was a lot of work a few years back. And then the last one for me just has to do with a continuing trend. And again, this kind of goes back to affordability, but you know, the reality is that we hear over and over and over again, and we've seen this even at comments from the state, that the way our bylaws are set up really discourage building of smaller homes. And you know, I think that Hopkinton has been at the forefront with, you know, for example, the open space subdivision plans and finding ways to maintain larger tracts of land. But we still see a trend where it's just there's not enough of a financial mechanism to encourage developers to build these open space subdivisions and to build homes that are smaller in scale. And so this kind of goes beyond affordable housing or ADUs. We use a term called attainability, and it's a function of bringing more varied housing stock into the market. But I personally would love to find a mechanism so that builders are coming to us with more open space subdivisions, with potentially not building more lots on a given, not building more homes on a given tract, but building them in such a way that makes for desirable communities that people want to live in, that support mental health and just in general a sense of community while minimizing or reducing, I should say, the impact of building more homes. So those are kind of collectively my three: the MBTA, host community component, tree protection, and finding some ways to encourage high quality but smaller homes when land is going to be developed.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Gary. Were there other members that would like to speak? Please raise your hand. All right, Mary.
So I think that we might want to, thank you, Rachel. I think that we might want to look at the Airbnb or short-term rental situation. I think there's no bylaw for it right now. And again, it's, it's better to catch things earlier before they become a problem than to wait too long until it is a problem. So
through the chair.
Yes, John.
Mary may not have been here for one of those meetings, but I'm pretty sure we discussed it like a couple months ago. And I believe Zach came to the conclusion that it really should be a general bylaw licensing issue rather than a zoning issue.
Okay, good.
Thank you, John. Was there any other member of the public or member of Zach? I'm opening it up to Zach members that would like to speak.
Rachel?
Yes. Recognizing Ron.
I would love to just support consideration for the change in the ADU structure. I am the Chamber's representative here on the Zoning Advisory Committee and a member of the Economic Development Committee. And one of the things that businesses are always bringing up to us is population density. So again, as Chuck was mentioning, creating some space that's more affordable to get some more people in town is going to really promote the development of businesses, particularly in the downtown area that's been so hard hit with all of the construction. And it's just something that just makes a lot of sense just on the face of it, that we have to put things in a way that families are allowed to help families in a very affordable way. So I'm very supportive of us taking up that ADU discussion and seeing if we can't get it on the warrant for this year's town meeting.
Great, thank you, Ron. Elise, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment from a personal perspective. Elise Mihailowski, 19 Walcott Street. I don't know if this would go with anything with Massachusetts laws, but I would like to see any new construction, residential or commercial, have some sort of requirement to do either geothermal or have solar panels on the roof as a requirement for the new buildings. Because if every new building had its own solar panels or relied on geothermal, then we would be less reliant on solar fields and we could be more sustainable from sort of an individual perspective. And going forward with new construction, it's easy for them to put the infrastructure for the roof and to do all of that from the very beginning.
Great, thank you.
Rachel?
Yes, recognizing Ted.
Elise, I was just trying to keep up on notes. Did you make that suggestion for all development, just commercial development, commercial and homes? I just want to make sure my notes are accurate.
I would like to see it for any new construction for residential or commercial.
Okay, thank you.
You know, the cost for residential, the builder would have to pay for the solar panels, but then they could balance it out by maybe raising the price of the home by that much more or whatever.
Okay. Was there anybody else from the public that would like to, or the board that would like to make some comments? Okay, seeing none. John.
Rachel, I think I see
Yeah, sorry,
Chuck Joseph with his hand up.
Oh, yes, go. Sorry, Chuck.
Thank you. Elise, I'm in 100% agreement with you philosophically. And we have, I've been involved in building an entire geothermal neighborhood in Hopkinton. And I would love to see more geothermal. However, it's a slippery slope when you start requiring elements to a home that add about $40,000 to the cost of a home. You know, we're trying to weigh affordability and inaffordability and also balance issues that relate to climate change. And it's a very, very difficult balance to achieve. But I support your idea. And in fact, we were one of the first ones to act on it, and it has been amazingly successful, but it is expensive. It is expensive to do it on a residential scale. In terms of solar, the only challenge I would put out there is that if you do not have a south-facing roof, it's really, or an east-facing roof, it's not as effective to put solar panels on those roofs. So I think that may be, there's an individual consideration whenever we orient a house as to how to go about doing that. That's my only comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. So unless there's anyone else that wants to provide comments, John, should we
Rachel,
close the
Jeff
public
Doherty
hearing?
has his hand up.
Who does?
Jeff Doherty.
Okay, I'm recognizing Jeff.
Rachel, thank you. And through the chair, back a while ago, I was on, I think, a planning board meeting, and I think the discussion was about limiting the number of trees that could be cut on a lot. And my takeaway from that was, because I was a landowner who's under a Massachusetts forestry program, it didn't seem like an equitable idea that any homeowner could cut as many trees as they wanted, but if a large landowner wanted to do it, or a developer, then they would be able to. So, you know, if Zach is thinking about instituting some kind of a limitation for tree cutting, it should be a fair and equitable one that's spread out over any type of landowner, not just available to a residential homeowner.
Jeff, could I get your address, please?
3 Angels Way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. John, was there any other members of the public that wanted to comment?
Through the chair, Rachel.
Yep, Curtis, recognizing Curtis.
Just wanted to kind of respond to Jeff. We had taken a look at several, I think a couple of meetings ago, we looked at 4 different communities in the Massachusetts that had development or tree protection related to development, and they did address commercial and residential pretty much all size lots. So that's kind of what we want to look at is something that will not single out particular ones, but kind of control everything. I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Curtis. Does anyone else, any other member of ZAC like to provide comments as a public member of the public? Okay, seeing none. John, do we need to officially close the public forum?
Nope. If this does happen, I can't imagine it would, but if we get through the rest of the agenda items and there's a member from the public who joined late, we could always get public input from them. So it's not an official hearing. It's not an advertised hearing, so we don't need to close it. It was really just an opportunity to hear what the public has to say.
Great. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined and given us comments. We really appreciate those. They're very helpful. All right, so moving on.
Rachel?
Yeah.
I just wanted to tag on. I think that this is the most we've had in a public forum meeting in maybe 5-6 years. And I really, really appreciate everybody coming and offering their thoughts. As one of the co-chairs, I can't promise we'll get to all of these. We'll move in the direction that you're hoping for, but it's really important for us to hear what you'd like for us to discuss. And we promise that we will give everything consideration.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ted. So moving on to the proposed zoning article on rooftop solar exemption. John, did you want to give a very brief 1 or 2 sentence description on that?
Yes. All right. So
thank you.
This is the draft bylaw. The change is in green at the very bottom. We are not proposing any other changes. This is just a clarification that rooftop solar, which is already exempt from site plan review, is not considered rooftop mechanical equipment, and therefore just clarifies, hoping to encourage others who may have been discouraged from reading the site plan bylaw, that rooftop solar is exempt from site plan review and can be done with just a building permit. Does not need a special permit, does not need site plan review, and is not considered rooftop mechanical equipment.
Great. Are there any questions from Zach? Any discussion?
I would like to move to approve the amendment as presented.
I second.
So just a point of order, I guess. We would be moving to recommend the bylaw to the planning board.
That's correct.
Great. Okay, so we're going to vote on a recommendation to propose to the planning board.
I'm sorry, through the chair, did we have a second? I missed it if we did.
Second. I agreed with the change, yes.
Thank you.
Rachel, before we vote, could I just ask John a question or
Sure.
a question and a half?
Yep.
John, I understand, and I think you know me well enough. I'm fully in support of putting more solar on roofs. This would make it so you don't need special permission. But I'm wondering, but when CVS was still Calela's, I think they put more equipment on the roof, and then that kind of weird shielding went up around it. Is that because that was a rule of special permission required when they added the equipment to I don't know that you were here before, but you might be able to picture it and help me think through.
Yeah,
and
I wasn't there
mean
for
that
that.
solar wouldn't need that weird siding? Is that what this also does?
So usually the deciding factor is if there is rooftop mechanical equipment, if it's visible from the street. So they may have installed that screening to make it not visible from the street. I don't know what kind of approval they got. That was before my tenure. So I don't know if I'm sure they got a site plan approval. But I don't know what was in that site plan approval, if they were required by that decision to put that screening up or if they did it on their own to avoid any kind of review. Solar would not require any kind of screening.
Right.
Because it would not be considered rooftop mechanical.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, so we're ready for a roll call vote then on the proposed zoning article, rooftop solar exemption, recommending to the planning board. Roll call vote, Mary Larson Marlowe,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ron Foisey,
Ron Foisey, yes.
Elise Mielowski,
Elise Mihайлowski, yes.
Curtis Smithson,
Curtis Smithson, yes.
Ted Barker Hook,
Ted is a yes.
Rachel is a yes. Did I miss anyone? No, sounds like it passes. Okay, John, I'm still going on your agenda. Let me know if there's items that I'm missing. But the next one you had is the proposed zoning article, inclusionary bylaws, flexible community development bylaw.
Yep. So this one is an existing bylaw. It's the flexible community development bylaw. Just as a background, this is every town has an inclusion, or most towns have an inclusionary development bylaw to have affordable housing built as part of any kind of subdivision. We call it a flexible community development bylaw, and I'm changing the name because it's hard to say. That would just make it a little bit easier for approvals, and also change it so that should the MBTA zoning be put into place in Hopkinton, this would apply. As the flexible community development bylaw stands, the MBTA communities would not need to follow or comply with that. So I'll get into the changes and then explain why the MBTA communities would not need to follow. So the first change is changing the name to inclusionary development bylaw, or we can just change it to, actually, I think that should have been inclusionary bylaw, getting rid of the development as well. That just clarifies what it is. Flexible community development, I don't think really spoke to what this was doing. So that just kind of makes it more of a standard across the state. In section 210-59 administration, this says that previously you need a special permit. And this is kind of the issue with the MBTA communities. MBTA communities have to be developed by right. So if they're developed by right, they don't need or will be required to get special permits. Therefore, they can build, whoever the developer is under the MBTA zoning district, would be able to build units without providing the affordable units. Therefore, if we got, for example, 100 units, none of them would have to be affordable. If we change this to remove the special permit requirement, at least 10 of those 100 units would have to be affordable, because that's what our inclusionary bylaw requires. And that's essentially the crux of all of these other changes, is making it so that the special permit is not required. The only time a special permit would be required is if a developer wanted to locate the affordable units off-site or make a payment in lieu. Two options that are already allowed and already require planning board approval, already require planning board special permit approval because the whole process requires special permit approval. These changes would make affordable by right required for any development over 10 units or 10 units or more, and only require a special permit for locating the units off-site or payment in lieu. And I'm going to avoid getting into the nitty-gritty details because I think that might just confuse people. What I've said is effectively what the changes of the bylaw is going to do. We've made some other cleanup changes. So like this down in section 210-62, Hopkinton Community Housing Task Force does not exist anymore. So we took that out. And then just some other things to make the whole bylaw a little bit cleaner. But really, it's to require the units by right without approvals for 10 units or more in the ratio of 1 for every 10, and then for 1 for every 10th unit, and then requiring special permit for offsite or in lieu.
Thank you, John. Opening up discussion.
Rachel?
Yes.
When I read through this and tried to understand it, and I don't think I understand all of it, and I really appreciate, John, everything you said and summing it up. The thing that caught my eye earliest, and I don't know where I stand on this yet, I just wanted to share what caught my eye, is the 1 for every 10 dwelling units. I feel like when I read that, that feels like 1/10 should be affordable housing. But in fact, the math doesn't quite work out that way. And I was asking myself and not giving myself an answer, should we be asking for more affordable units under this? Given how much talk we've had about wanting to create more affordable housing in town, one affordable for every 19 non-affordable doesn't seem like we're really pushing for a more affordable community to me. But again, I haven't thought it all through. I don't know where I stand, but I wonder if anyone else has thoughts on that. 2 units for every 30 units, that's really 1 in 15, right? If a developer wanted to aim for the high end of those ranges. I don't know if a developer would want to aim for the high end. I don't know. But that's what caught my eye more than anything.
Through the chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, Ted, so I think you got it right. I don't know why it was written this way. My guess is that it would be just an agreement between Zach Planning Board and developers to give a little bit of leeway for developers. So we've seen a lot of 8 and 9 unit developments, which don't have to provide affordable housing. I don't think it makes sense to do 10% straight away. Because if you do a development that's 1 or 2 houses, then they'd have to do a whole nother unit because you would essentially round up, right? So maybe we change, if you wanted to go down that route, you change the wording to say 10% for developments 10 units or more, or 5 units or more, or make it some ratio in that way, so that every development over a certain amount does have to provide units, because as you pointed out, you can get 29 units and only provide 2 affordables, which isn't 10%. That's just how it's been written. So we kind of kept it that way to change it as little as possible, just to make it work with the MBTA zoning and future developments. But this is certainly up to Zach to workshop this, talk about it a little bit more, change the ratios, whatever you guys want before you send it to planning board.
Rachel?
Yes. Yeah, Ted.
I wonder if Mr. Joseph is still on the call, and I wonder if he has thoughts on that.
Through the chair, if I may, I didn't say anything because I didn't know if the public could comment on this or not. There's a couple of thoughts here. My understanding, John, if I understood you correctly, the MBTA zoning does not require any affordable housing as it's currently written. Is that correct?
Correct. So MBTA zoning is just to provide a by right multifamily zoning district or districts. It does not have an affordable provision because the state assumes towns have their own affordable provisions, inclusionary bylaws, right? And maybe their goal is to encourage towns who don't have inclusionary bylaws but will be subject to MBTA zoning to adopt an inclusionary bylaw. But the MBTA communities is supposed to be by right, which means you cannot require developments under MBTA zoning to get a special permit for any portion of their development. You can do limited site plan review, but it's very limited as laid out in section or chapter 3A, whatever the actual reference is to the MBTA community zoning. So this is, while MBTA community zoning may not get accepted in Hopkinton, and we may just have the standard zoning that we currently have, this is looking ahead to see if that gets passed. And then even if it doesn't, this will change for all future developments to not require a special permit, which should make it a little bit easier for developers. I will say that the special permits were required because there was an allowance for a density bonus. That density bonus has never been used.
Yeah.
No developer has ever opted to use that. So it apparently was not effective. So removing that to allow for by right seemed like the next reasonable step.
So through the chair, if I may. So John, if I understand this correctly, this is essentially overlaying our current inclusionary bylaw onto the MBTA zone if we were to establish an MBTA zone.
This would be applicable to every zoning district in town.
Yeah.
MBTA would then be required, any developments under the MBTA overlay zone would then be required to comply with this, just as any OSLPD development would be required or any conventional subdivision would be required. Okay. This is not really tailored to the MBTA communities. It's just, we are doing this now in anticipation of the discussion about MBTA communities. And should that get passed, it's going to be easier to pass this type of inclusionary bylaw now rather than have the argument about it along with the MBTA communities.
If I may, through the chair, again, just going back to Ted's question, Ted, the approximate 10% affordability, and your question is a legitimate one, which is why don't we require more affordable housing? It does become an economic decision for the developer, because the way it's written is all of our affordable units have to be equal to our non-affordable units in terms of their basic construction and all that other stuff. So you're taking 10% of your normal income and you're reducing that by the affordability factor, where essentially you don't make any money on those 10%. There comes a point where there's a breaking point in there, and it doesn't work in terms of that, unless the developer were allowed a greater density and a higher percentage of affordable units. And I don't know what that math would be. I would have to work that through. But by and large, the 10% is manageable for any fairly large scale project.
I'm sorry, right at the very end, there was noise back in that part of the house. Did you say 10% generally is manageable?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Through the chair.
Yes, Curtis.
I would kind of support Ted's approach to maybe rewording this to where it's 1 for up to 10 units and then 10% beyond those 10 units. If it sounds like Chuck said the 10% was workable, doable, feasible, maybe we go back and kind of reword it in that way. So we wind it with actual 10% instead of 1 in 19. If somebody decided just to lop off that last one.
Through the chair.
Yes, Mary.
So just to give all of you who aren't aware, kind of the history of what's been going on in developments, most of the town does not have the square footage to do any really large developments anymore. So wetlands contributes to that. So most developments in recent years that, when I've been on planning board have been under 10. So in fact, no affordable units have been built during the time or approved to be built as part of a development. We have taken payments in lieu and so on, but in many cases, the developments are going to be 9 units because then they don't reach the 10 and then they don't have to provide an affordable unit. So, again, it's, as Chuck was saying, it's a math issue, it's like, does it make sense to try to fit in a 10th unit if then that means that they need to provide an affordable unit or pay pay the money in lieu. So for the MBTA housing overlay that we will eventually be showing to town meeting and letting them decide whether or not we're going to do one. That's a good option, a good possibility of high density housing, which would exceed the 10 units. So that is actually, that could be in the future sometime a potential for, density higher than Legacy Farms apartments. And in that case, the affordability issue will kick in if we make these changes. So from that perspective, I support these changes that John has proposed. If we redo the calculations as Ted has proposed on how the 10% is determined or how it's counted, I have no objection to it, but I want everybody to keep in mind that that could be more controversial at town meeting. And sometimes it is helpful to get kind of the absolute necessary wording changes done before you then suggest, perhaps in a subsequent year, a more controversial change. Because sometimes it can get voted down because of the controversial change, and then you never get the other wording changes you want in there for administrative purposes. So that's just, my 2 cents there. I do think that we need to make the changes that John has proposed here. And I think that we may want to make the changes that Ted has proposed either this same year or in a subsequent year.
Rachel.
Yes, Ted.
I say with a smile, I haven't proposed any changes. I just proposed to talk about the numbers, I wasn't sure where I stood. So
that was just a shorthand way of saying what we're talking about.
I guess I had 2 thoughts based on the last couple of things I heard. Let's pretend we're talking about 10%. I don't know what that means if you build 17 houses. I don't know or 17 units. I don't know what 1.7 affordable units looks like. So maybe there's rounding. I don't know how that works. Maybe if you build 17, that rounds up to 2 affordable units.
So through the chair, just to interrupt Ted on that one.
Sure.
Usually it's however the bylaw is written. You'll see in the EV charging, we round up.
Okay.
So any fractional space gets rounded up. But if you write in the bylaw, you round to the nearest whole number, 1.7 would round up to 2, but 1.4 would round down to 1.
Right. Okay.
So it's basically how you guys would decide to word that.
Right. Okay. However, I'm only thinking out loud. If we also had this kicks in when you have a 10th unit, then we keep having 9 units of luxury apartments, and we're not solving that problem. And I don't know if this is the article to solve that problem. I agree with Mary that I've been on Zach a long time, and it's important that we propose things that we think are going to pass in town meeting. At the same time, I don't hear at town meeting a whole lot of desire for affordable houses. And yet I think a lot of us here on the committee think that we really need to address that. And that puts us in a tough spot. We want to move along the planning board stuff that we think will pass, but we also want to move along the planning board, as Gary encouraged us to do. Looking for my notes, something to the effect of think of what is best for the community, not just our own interests. And that's a difficult balance beam for us to walk. I remember I don't remember specifically which ones, we've had some other articles in the past, Mary, and you and I were serving together, where we said, let's do the easy stuff first, and then we'll take on the more controversial later. And I think that makes a lot of sense sometimes. I think other times that just means we're not going to really get to the controversial stuff because we don't think it's going to pass. To sum up, I don't know if I'm proposing any change to the ratios here. But I'm also not ready to say, let's just, if we do think we need to change the ratios, let's put that off to next time. Because at some point, if we believe that's important, we need to, with the work of the planning board as well, try to explain to the town why we think such things are important. So, but I'm still proposing nothing.
Thank you. Gary, did you have some comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add one more point for consideration. And certainly we tend to talk a lot about affordable housing, but I want to remind folks of the term attainable housing. And so I think at the end of the day, for better or for worse, affordable housing has some negative connotations to it. I mean, there's very strict guidelines as to what applies to what complies with affordable housing. There's limitations on who can buy it and who can't. I mean, and there's a lot there, but I still go back to this idea of building attainable housing, which may not be affordable, but is still going to be lower cost than a lot of what's being built today. And so I think that I just wanted to throw that out there because this article certainly is a way to encourage more affordable housing, but I think that there's a lot more levers that collectively we might be able to pull to improve the amount of attainable housing. So I just wanted to offer that up there and kind of introduce another term. And, maybe it's worth some brainstorming or discussion around, other vehicles or mechanisms that we can use to encourage, what effectively is smaller homes that are in turn lower cost and are attainable by a larger percentage of the population.
Great, thank you.
Through the chair?
Yes, Mary. Mm-hmm.
So in relation to this particular bylaw proposed changes, I just have a question for John and related to, the special permits. I mean, OSLPD, I think those would still have a special permit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's because of the OSLPD, trade-offs, yeah. Okay.
Right.
So, a standard subdivision, not OSLPD, would that need a special permit?
Currently, or if this bylaw passed?
If the bylaw changes that you're proposing go through?
No, it would not need a special permit to provide the affordable units. It would only need a special permit if the developer proposed off-site units, affordable units, or payments in lieu of affordable units. If they proposed, they had a 30-unit development and they proposed 3 affordable units on site, it wouldn't need any other further approval.
Okay. But it would come before planning board for a site plan review?
For subdivision.
Subdivision.
For subdivision
Okay.
approval.
Subdivision approval. Okay. So I'm just trying to understand with the changes, because it's, it's clearly marking off the part about deleting the part about, a special permit is required, that piece. It would not change a large part of the planning board review of, multi unit subdivisions. It would still come before planning board for most things.
Correct.
And I'm not talking about affordable. I'm just talking about regular things, so.
Right. Yep. So conventional subdivision or OSLPD subdivision, whatever it is, would still come before planning board for the subdivision approval.
Okay.
But this is not, I don't know why it's trying to highlight this part, section 21058.
Got it.
This is not changing. So
Okay.
any development with 10 or more net units would require affordable units provided, but it
Yep.
would not require a special permit to approve those affordable units.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And that, that's just to clarify the wording changes to this article specifically. And that it's not, and again, I do think that, should it get to town meeting, that'll come up because people will be like, wait, you're, like eliminating the need for a special permit, they can build whatever they want then. So just that it's important that we have it very clear in our minds. This is not removing the, coming before planning board for a development. It's just removing the special permit needs for the affordable units. So, okay, thank you. And again, I still support the wording changes that you have proposed.
Through the chair.
Yes, Ted.
I'm scanning the room. Oh, it looks like maybe Mr. Joseph left. Is that what you're seeing as well, John?
Yes, that's what I'm seeing.
All right. I had a question for him. Maybe it'll come up another time. Never mind.
So through the chair,
Mhm.
for any
Yes, John?
SAC members who might be concerned that this is the only bite of the apple they get, this will, sending it to the planning board will require planning board to have a hearing. So you can also attend the planning board meetings and discuss it there. And that's true for any of these bylaws.
Right, but John, we're recommending to the planning board that they make this change. Is that right?
You're recommending that the planning board discuss this change.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yes, you could also recommend that they approve it, but planning board may take this bylaw, change the wording. They may take the initiative and change it to 10% of any development over 5 units. That doesn't have to come from Zach. That can come from planning board. So you would be recommending that the planning board move this article to town meeting or to have a hearing on it. Or you could recommend that they recommend this bylaw to town meeting, because planning board doesn't approve it. They just move it to town meeting. They add it to the warrant.
Right.
Through the chair.
Yes, Ted.
Is there, and maybe Gary, you want to chime in, is there any reason to rush this particular article? I think in the past, the message we've gotten from the planning board is, we don't really want you to send it to us until you've had a good, thorough discussion of it, not, hey, you might want to look at this part of it. So I wonder if, since we did have a robust discussion about that section of number of units and ratios of affordable, not affordable, is there a way to think about attainable as opposed to affordable? I wonder, I would propose not voting on this tonight and giving ourselves more time to talk about the question I raised, again, not my proposal, so that we could think on it. Now it looks like maybe Gary left, and I was hoping he would chime in, but it looks like he just bailed on me before he could say anything. Anyway, that would be my suggestion.
So through the chair, just a clarification on the attainable versus affordable. Attainable is not a defined term. Affordable is. So attainable is essentially made attainable by the market, not by regulations.
I think I understood that, but I do think Gary raises a good point. And probably this is not the place to aim for attainable, because this is a rule with definitions. Nonetheless, I would like for us to not vote on this tonight so that we can spend a little bit more time thinking about what seemed to generate some discussion before we pass it on to the planning board.
Through the chair, I agree.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody else has comments, but I mean, I have quite a lot of comments. In general, I support thinking about this some more. And I can tell you that attainable housing that concept was discussed a lot in the growth study committee, a lot. And we had good, robust discussions about how can we make housing for the town, and partly in the downtown district area, but also partly for members of the community that have special contact with the town. So town employees, police, fire, that kind of thing. How can we make this town more attainable for people who want to really invest in the town or are invested in the town because they work as a town employee? So I support more discussion on this. I think we could not just propose to hit the default. Let's just default to what we have and to really think through sort of what is the baseline and where do we want that to go. But I'm open to other members of ZAC with their thoughts.
Through the chair.
Yes, Ron.
Could I just ask John if there are any deadlines to the MBTA community laws that we've got to get something done by such and such a date to be in compliance?
There is an action plan that needs to be submitted, and I think it's just like an online form. It's not a full-blown plan that needs to be developed. That's due, I think it's at the end of January of 2023. And then any bylaw or zoning district needs to be approved by town meeting by December 31st, 2024. So we have time. But if the intent was to start the MBTA community's planning, we may want to have this in place, but it's not required.
That, I support taking a little more time and thinking this through in a little bit more detail.
And I'd say, just to tag on, I wasn't proposing we push this off for months, just maybe we spend a little more time. I think that we can certainly get this done. John, when you said there's an online form, that sounds like that's your job, not Zach or planning board. Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so do I need a motion to table this for further discussion?
You don't need one, but if you want one, you can vote on that, but it's not necessary.
Okay. All right. All right, well then I think we'll just move on to the next zoning article. Electric vehicle parking.
All right. So this is an entirely new bylaw, and it would be inserted as part of the parking section, the supplementary regulations, which holds the parking section in the zoning bylaw. Parking is under 210-124. So all of what you're seeing right now is new. This is not changing any existing bylaw. This is all new. And I just want to say right off the bat that I spoke to Nicole Simpson about this, and she has been incredibly helpful with discussing this, thinking about it, and looking at our next steps for this. So essentially, the crux of this is requiring new parking lots or parking lots that are being altered or otherwise subject to the parking requirements in the site plan section of zoning to provide charging stations or infrastructure that would allow charging stations to be installed at a later date. And I'll stop there. Everything else is details. So we can go through. I can answer questions. I can explain in more detail, but I would imagine these questions are going to come up. So I'll just leave it there and answer questions.
Through the chair, I have a question.
Yes, Elise.
This would be for residential and commercial, just any parking lot in general, or is it more specific?
So residential
like
does
condo
not
development.
So
okay.
This would apply to anything going before the planning board for site plan approval related to parking. So in the applicability section, it says major projects for parking areas containing 25 or more parking spaces, and minor projects for parking areas containing 5 or more parking spaces. Residential uses are exempt from site plan review. So that's why at the beginning of the meeting, Nicole mentioned electric vehicle parking for multifamily, because this would not cover residential developments because those are exempt. This would just be for commercial, public, town uses would be required to comply with this, but not necessarily residential units.
Okay.
So, John, a question. When you say town, are you talking about construction of new town buildings? Or
Yes.
are you talking about things like schools, like a new
Yes.
school?
Correct.
What about so a new school or a new
A new town
town hall, a library?
a new library, a new fire station. All those would be required to comply. And my
A dog
thinking on
park?
that, I'm sorry?
A dog park, a playing field?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they meet the requirements for site plan review. So a dog park with 4 parking spaces would not.
Okay. I just wanted to expand beyond buildings only to other town
Yep.
properties.
Yep. So it's already being built, but the public parking associated with 2535 Main Street would be required to comply with this, should it get passed, and should it be developed after it was passed.
Got it. Okay.
Coincidentally, there are EV charging planned for that parking lot, so it's moved, but if it hadn't, then it would be required. And my thinking on that was that if we're going to require developers to do this, then the town should be, said this in the planning board, without realizing the pun, leading the charge in providing EV stations.
And John, just can you explain the thinking in terms of new construction versus retrofitting? Is that just it's initially easier in a new construction, or were there discussions about retrofitting?
So if you are altering a parking area of 5 spaces or more, it would be a minor site plan project review. If you're altering an area of 25 spaces or more, it would be major site plan review. So those would still be required to comply, even if it's technically a retrofit. So new construction obviously would comply because it's a brand new parking lot. But if you are altering, say, Bill's Pizza, just because it's right next to town hall, decided to redo their parking area, and this had already passed town meeting, they would be required to retrofit parking spaces with either the charging stations or the infrastructure. And maybe I can go into a little bit more detail about the difference between the charging stations and infrastructure. But I can answer questions first.
Through the chair, I have a question. I may have missed this. I don't remember seeing this article in my email. So if I'm asking something I should have read, my apologies. How many spots? Is this another ratio thing? 1/10, 1/20th? I mean, or 20%?
So this was in your email, but it was, I think, omitted from the first email, and then I sent it almost immediately after as a follow-up.
Maybe that's what happened then.
Why you
Okay.
missed it, yeah.
I'm sorry
So-
about that.
Yep, that's fine. So let me get into a little bit more detail then, just so everyone's aware. Right now, there are 3 levels of charging stations. There's level 1, level 2, and DCFC. Level 1 is essentially the plug at your house. Charges very slowly. You may be able to charge a car overnight or during, throughout a day, but it takes a long time to charge. Level 2, much faster, but still takes some time. So I don't know the exact timing. Nicole explained it to me, but now I've forgotten. You can charge in like several hours. You can charge a car. DCFC is DC fast charge. And that's the new standard, I guess. Some people call it level 3. That's not what it's actually called, though, I found out. That can charge a car in like less than an hour. This would require any development that is proposing a change to the parking areas to put in either the EVSE, which is EVSE installed charging stations, level 2 or DCFC, not level 1, or the infrastructure to support a level 2 or DCFC, not level 1. So level 1, we're leaving just at home. You can only do level 1s at home. We are not going to allow, if this were to pass, developers to put in a level 1 charging station. And the level 2 would be at a minimum. So, in 5 years, if something is faster than DCFC, they wouldn't be limited to level 2 or DCFC. They could do the higher speed one. They would just have to do at least a level 2. And should town meeting approve this, they like it, another technology comes along, we could always amend this to make DCFC the minimum standard. And the ratio to answer Ted's question is right here in section D. Parking areas with 5 spaces or less do not need to comply with this. 5 to 10 spaces have to have at least one charging station or the infrastructure put in place, which is essentially conduit. You don't need to do the electrical connection. You don't have to do a new panel in the building. You just have to have the avenue to put in the infrastructure or to put in the charging equipment to support 2 spaces. So it's either 1 installed charging space or 2 spaces served by the infrastructure for charging, so that you could just plop a charger down in those 2 spaces. For parking areas of 11 to 24 spaces, so anything more than 10, less than 25, 2 charging stations or the infrastructure for 5 charging stations. 5, the EV ready parking spaces is what we're calling them. And those 2 are defined here. EV ready and EVSE installed are what we're saying. And then any parking area of 25 spaces or more gets to a percentage. And Ted, this is what I was talking about with the affordable. It's 10% of the total parking spaces as charging stations, or 20% of the total parking spaces as EV ready spaces. And then if you get 1.7 spaces because of the fractions, you need to round up. So we're saying everything is rounded up. Any fraction is rounded up to the next whole number. So 0.25 parking spaces would be 1, 1.7 would be 2. Does that answer your question?
If that was aimed at me, I think it does. I was just writing down my other questions so I wouldn't forget them. Sorry. I will rattle off 3 questions I have. And again, if it was in the email, I apologize. What is the to the parking lot developer, and presumably the building developer or the town, if it's a town building, what's the cost difference between putting in a full charging station versus only laying the infrastructure? Does this
it's significant.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's significant. A charging station is significantly more expensive than putting in the infrastructure.
Is it twice as expensive?
More than twice.
So wouldn't this, if I am a developer looking to maximize profits, wouldn't I do nothing but put in infrastructure and leave no place for cars to charge?
That is possible. The thinking is the demand is going to come from who the developer is serving, the tenants or the customers or whoever. If Price Chopper decides to redo their parking lot, they would be forced to comply with this. They may already have plans to put in 5 EV charging stations, so they may comply that way. They may be able to do a mix of 2 charging stations and EV ready spaces. And then as more people get EV cars, right, or EV electric vehicles, it wouldn't be EV cars, but electric vehicles, maybe, and the prices for those charging stations comes down, maybe they would then put more in. And the thinking is, if they've already got the infrastructure in place, they don't need to rip up the parking lot again to put these charging stations in. They could just plop them down where the infrastructure is already in place. So it's baby steps, but it's baby steps that could potentially make it easier for these developers in the future when the demand comes for more EV charging stations.
So my third question is along the same lines, but I think maybe you've answered it. And it's a question not for you, John, but for everyone, but you may have answered it. Is this enough to have a 25 lot parking lot with 2 spots, if I did my math correctly? But maybe you let the market decide. And if someone, Price Chopper says, oh my gosh, 50% of our customers have EV cars, and now they're going to Stop and Shop, maybe that causes them to fix that problem.
We did discuss that, Nicole and I, and Gary and I as well. And one of the things that we were thinking is people with EVs generally charge their cars at home. You might charge your car at work. You might charge your car on the highway when you're doing a road trip, and likely rest areas are going to start getting DCFCs in place so that you can charge them very quickly as you're driving from point A to B. It's unlikely that you're going to need a lot of charging as you go about your errands around town, but having them there will encourage people to get EVs so that they know they're not going to get stranded on the side of the road. So I don't think personally you need EV charging at every parking spot at Price Chopper, at the doctor's office, at town hall. But having a couple for those who might need it would encourage them to use it and maybe encourage others to use it. And then they could just go home and fully charge their car. And then we're also assuming gas stations are going to be a thing of the past. Charging stations are going to be new. So if you really need charging, you'll go to there rather than spend extra time at the grocery store. Or maybe you'll spend a little bit extra time at the grocery store, but you'll have other options aside from these parking spaces. This is just to goose the process along a little bit, make it a little bit more palatable for EV users to drive around town and to serve their needs, and maybe to encourage others who are on the fence about getting EVs to know that there are options around town for them to charge if they need it, aside from their home charging. And I should also mention, because I think this is an appropriate part, at the beginning, in the purpose, we did clearly state it is not the intent of this bylaw to open a private parking area for public use. So if there's a doctor's office that has charging stations, they are not going to be compelled to let a member of the public who's not a tenant or not a patron of their services to come in and use the charging stations. They can reserve those spaces to their tenants and to their customers if they wanted to. Obviously, town parking would be different. That would be open to everybody because it's a public parking area, and a private parking person could open it up to the public, but they're not going to be compelled to do so.
And I think that maybe ties into my last question. I am not yet an EV user. I hope to be sometime soon, but I'm not there yet. I would imagine if Price Chopper had charging stations, Price Chopper ends up paying for me to top off my car. Is that true? Or do they have pay for charge? Is that part of how this works? If I go to center school, I guess they're closed. If I go to the high school and charge my car, is the town of Hopkinton picking up the tab for my electricity?
So that would be up to the landowner. I believe there are charging stations that you can charge people money for.
Yeah.
And if they opt to do that, or I'm sure there's add-ons to control the time that you can, you pay for an hour, you pay for half an hour, something like that. Or you don't have any cost associated with it at all. And that's going to be up to the decision and the discretion of the property owner.
Okay. Thanks.
Through the chair.
Yes, Curtis?
Did I understand, John, you said this would not be required for multifamily residential?
Correct. As it's currently written, it would not be required.
Okay, but it sounds like most everybody's going to be charging overnight at home while they're asleep. So it would make a lot of sense to have it at multifamily residential locations.
So people who have EVs that live at multifamily residences will have cords provided along with their EVs that can plug into household outlets. Or it's up to multifamily developers to put in the outlets to allow for like a level 2. So currently, I believe most EVs come with like a level 1 charging, which is very slow, but they would be able to do that. So that wouldn't prohibit multifamily residents from doing that if they have the ability to do that. We are regulating this through site plan review, and residential developments are exempt from site plan review. So we would have to do a separate bylaw, or within this bylaw, change it to add in a residential component. And at this point, we're just trying to get this done. And then we could always add the residential component in because it's a little bit more complex than tying it to site plan review.
Okay, that was my second question is, will we have to completely revamp what we have now regarding residential if we tried to add the EV requirements? It sounds like we would.
Maybe not necessarily revamp, but you would add in a different section specifically for residential developments, because everything that's written here would not, you'd have to do a different applicability. You'd have to figure out a way to apply it to residential developments. Because right now the applicability is if you're subject to site plan review, this applies to you. Residential developments are not subject to site plan review. So you'd have to figure out a different trigger for residential developments to comply.
So
And
what
we did
kind
not
of
do that.
review process do residential developments go through?
There's very many of them.
Well, we need to fix that.
I mean, it could be Chapter 40B, it could be OSLPD, it could be however we go about approving multifamily. Could be OSMA district, though they're at their limit for, or almost at their limit for residential units. So village housing subdistrict and garden apartment subdistrict are two that are currently not in force because we're above our 10%. But should we change the regulations for those districts, we could put in a applicability of this saying, if you are subject to garden apartments or village housing, you are also then subject to this.
Okay.
Chapter 40B would be a completely different animal.
So this is basically going to cover commercial, and then for residential, we would have to come up with a different approach that wasn't tied to site plan review since they don't require.
Correct. Everything else, like the number of spaces, the other requirements could all apply. You would just need to figure out a trigger of residential developments to do this.
Okay.
Through the chair, I see that Ms. Simpson put her hand up, which makes me happy because I had a quick question for her. Given that you worked on what we're looking at with John, I'm curious, would you like to see the multi-unit housing EV be a separate something, or would you like it wrapped into here? And then whatever else you have to say, obviously, I'd love to hear.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I don't know enough about the mechanisms that I don't know the bylaws well enough to know if it's appropriate to have it through this one or in a separate one. But I do think residential is a gap right now. As far as what somebody would do if they lived in that kind of housing and there wasn't a charger there, I'm not sure that they really would use the level 1 charger at home. I think there's a lot of barriers to that. So if I could say quickly, the 3 levels of charging, like John described. So level 1 is approximately 2 to 3 miles per hour of charging. So that's kind of your emergency plug-in. It's what I use when I go to my parents' house where they don't have a charger. I'm there for a weekend. We have it plugged in while the car is sitting there. Over the course of a weekend, you get a good amount of charge, but it's for most people, that wouldn't be their primary mechanism of charging. A level 2 charger is what you see most places. When you see them in town, I think we have maybe 5 in town. And that's also what I put in at my home, most people would put in at their home if they owned an EV. And that's where you get about 25 miles an hour of charging. And then the DC fast charge, those are very expensive to put in. So they're pretty limited right now. And that's really what you use when you're on a road trip. That's what you do when you're driving more than 200 miles or 250 miles or whatever the range of your car is, 300 miles. You would want to stop and, fill up your car, charge up your car to go the rest of the way. So I think residential is a gap right now because if somebody lived in one of those multifamily housing that didn't have this, they probably would end up charging, either going up to Northborough or down to Rentham to do DC fast charge to get a full charge quickly, or if their workplace has a charger, parking it there, or just sporadically an hour at a time going to, different stores or restaurants or public lots for charging. So I think what that would mean is probably somebody in that kind of housing would not choose to get an EV because it's really not practical for charging. So this would certainly help that, but I think to really enable anybody to get a charger, that would have to be addressed at some point. And if I could just comment also about the question for cost. I think even if you look at the ones in town, there's a few that are free charging, and I think there are some by the kilowatt, a few cents per kilowatt, and then the other model would be per time it's parked there. So those are kind of the three different things, and presumably a business could change their mind if they put in one model and they want to adjust it or adjust the price to cover the expense of it. They could do that. But there's kind of different cost models around it. A free charger might incentivize somebody to come to that particular restaurant or something like that if they could charge their car while dining or something along those lines. So I don't know if that addressed the question. I would like to see residential, whether it's now or in a future year. I think it does need to be addressed, whether it's through this bylaw or a separate one. I think you guys are more knowledgeable on the right way to do it, but for now, probably people in that kind of housing would not be making the choice to get an EV because of that limitation.
Through the chair.
Yes, Curtis.
In looking through the bylaw, the only thing I saw was find the section. It's under E3. So the last page of the PDF, requirements that the connection shall be no less than 36 inches or higher than 48 inches from the surface of the floor. But we ought to change that to pavement surface. Just a minor thing. And I think I would probably be supportive of going ahead and sending this on as it is, and then putting the pin in trying to get residential covered in some way. It's like Nicole said, it's going to make people shy away from owning EVs if they live in a multifamily development because they really don't have any way to charge it. I think that should be addressed at some point. I don't know if have had enough discussion to make a motion to send this on to planning board.
I had some comments. I've had my hand raised. If I could just, no problem.
Yeah, sure. Linda, go ahead.
So my first question is, where is this document? Since I wouldn't be on an email list, where would I get to look at it?
Right now, it is just in internal files and then with Zach. So I emailed it to Zach before this meeting.
Okay.
It would be made public when the planning board has a hearing about it.
Got it.
I can also send, if you want it, I can also send it to you.
That's okay. I was just curious. One question I had was if we looked at this past year, you could take 2022 or 2021, how many lots would be affected by something like this in a typical year? Like, would we expect this to add 1 EV per year, 10?
Through the chair, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it would definitely be more than one. Just for example, 103, 109 South Street was recently approved for site plan. And luckily, they are proposing EV charging in, I believe, or at least EV ready spaces in all of their parking garage spaces. But the site plan approval required at least 6 charging stations. And they were perfectly fine with that. And they said, we're going to do more than 6 and we're going to wire basically all the spots for charging. So that's just, right there is probably going to be more than 10, but that's obviously a unique situation because they were very aggressive about the EV charging themselves. I want to say there was at least 3 more site plans that were approved, and most of them were 10 spaces or more. I'd have to look at my files to actually get a number, but I think we would be probably looking at more than 10 spaces in a year, at least, depending on the size of the developments.
Thank you. I was just wondering about whether this would have any impact, and it sounds like it would. It's we have enough activity that it would make a difference. I also had a comment on the residential. So I understand putting it off. I just want to add that it's sort of an economic justice, environmental justice issue, because people who own their own single family houses, not only are people who tend to be able to afford EVs better, but the whole charging thing is definitely better for them. So having these public charging for people who don't live in single family homes is definitely a nice option. So while Nicole might not charge up at Price Chopper, somebody who lives in a multifamily and knows there are chargers available in town might be more inclined towards an EV if we have these. So I think this does help people that will rely on it who can't do it at home.
Through the chair, if I could respond to that.
Yeah, sure.
I agree. I'm not saying that residential is not important. As we were discussing this, I was looking through the bylaw. There are not many places in the zoning bylaw that allow for multifamily to be developed in Hopkinton right now.
Mm-hmm.
The A district, RA district, RB district do not allow for multifamily housing. The RLF district does not allow for multifamily housing. You can do multifamily housing in the B district and the downtown business district, but it requires a special permit from the Board of Appeals. And then the other larger multifamily areas are allowed through the village housing, which is not in effect right now because we are above 10%. The garden apartments, which is also not in effect right now because we are above 10%. And then the Ozma district, which is Legacy Farms, and that's essentially built out. So aside from the MBTA communities overlay, which still has not been developed, there are not a lot of opportunities for multifamily residential development in Hopkinton. And this would apply to any changes to multifamily development. So all of the multifamily that currently exists would not need to comply with any type of regulation like this because they wouldn't be tearing up their parking lots. So I am sympathetic to the residential argument. And I think we need to have something for when that comes down the pipeline. Right now, it does not seem like it's a major factor because either everything is already existing or there's no option for it to be built in the future as it stands.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make my point clear. I said that I thought that having these public charging stations in commercial areas would be helpful to people who live in multifamily because they can't charge there.
Yep.
So that was more my
right.
point.
No, I wasn't saying that against you. That was giving me an opportunity to address the residential multifamily thing. No, I agree. And I don't think we can compel through the zoning bylaw that the charging stations are free. But I do also agree with that. I just wanted to address the fact while we were talking tangentially about residential, that it doesn't appear that there's a ton of options at this point in time to put in EV charging in multifamily because there's not a lot of options for multifamily in Hopkinton at this point in time.
Sure. I just had two more comments. One is also that people who have plug-in hybrids, not pure EVs, also would benefit from this. So, because they get much less range in general on their charge up. So as they're doing errands, they actually might charge up at a public spot. So those are two people who definitely would benefit from these. And the last comment or question I had is, will there be any help or advice to the businesses or people who need to install these on what to do, or is it totally up to them to go figure it out?
As of right now, if this were to get passed today, there would be no support, but the intent is to have a package of support documents, references, other examples, so that it would make it easier for them to install it. We would need to walk the fine line of conflict of interest and encouraging certain brands and developers and stuff like that, but information as much as we could provide, we would be looking to collect and then distribute.
Okay, great. Thank you.
John, can I ask a question? And I don't know if it's in this bylaw or somewhere else. Have we defined an actual business that does EV charging? So think of like a gas station that decides it's going to become a pay for a, electric charge. Is that anywhere here in this bylaw, or
We do not.
does it belong here?
No. So the way, and we've actually talked about that internally because we've had a question from a EV charging station developer where they would be able to locate in Hopkinton. And right now that's not a use that's allowed in Hopkinton because it's not a use that anyone really thought of even, 10 years ago. So that would be something that would be an allowed use in certain districts that we would need to add in. And we can certainly do that as a separate effort. I don't think it would work within this bylaw. It would be more of the listing of uses in the B district or the listing of uses in the BD district, that type of thing, and have electrical vehicle charging station, much like we have fueling stations as a use.
Great. Okay, thank you. Were there other questions? Elise, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question and comment. Really random question that probably isn't super relevant right now. If we did require this for like multifamily residential, which sounds like that's a whole nother conversation, how would they decide who paid for the power? Would they just have to have like the, ones that you pay when you plug your car in? Or because if you're charging your car every day, that's a significant amount of power that you're using. I doubt that the like apartment building or condo building is just going to be like, oh yeah, we'll pay for everyone to charge their car for free.
That would be something we'd have to figure out. And most likely it would be the property owner would have the discretion to either charge residents for it or set up a different system. I don't think that's something the town would be able to regulate.
Okay. Because I think my thoughts were, if it came to that, when the time comes, we would want to be able to regulate their price so that the people weren't being charged more than they would be charged if they had, in their own home from the electric company. Because we don't want people taking advantage of the situation and charging them twice as much to charge their car because they control the price at that particular charging station. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. It's just, yeah. I mean, unless there's guidance from the state that comes down that says residential developments that provide EV charging can't charge at this level, I feel like the town would have a hard time justifying setting a price limit for property owners to abide by, because in situations where maybe the power costs more than the floor price that we would regulate, then that would compel the property owners to essentially pay the residents to charge their cars. And maybe there's going to be a mandate from the state that says all residential developments have to allow for free charging of their residents. I don't know, but that would take a lot more research than I have done so far to answer adequately.
Okay. And then my comment was that I think from what I've read over this, it looks good to me. And I think everything has been explained really well. My personal vote would be to go ahead with this as it is and try to see how people in town meeting respond to it before adding all the residential and everything else to it. Because in my experience, the more you have in an article, the more people get confused or the more they focus on one particular part of it instead of the whole. So that would be my vote, to just keep it as it is for now. And then if people in the town respond well to it, we can always go back next year and amend it or add to it
Thank you. Were there other questions from the board?
Nicole, is your hand up again, or is that left over?
I just put it up again. I was just going to make a comment to what Elise was asking about the pricing, and I think this would apply for both residential or commercial charging. One reason that one cost model that I have seen is charging a certain amount for, let's say, the first 4 hours, or in residential, you might want to be able to cover an overnight, but then raising the cost for being plugged in for the time beyond that. And a reason you might want to do that is so that somebody doesn't just park there and take up the space for days and limit other people from utilizing it. So I know this bylaw doesn't really have any rules around the cost model, but that's something that even if somebody was offering free charging, they might want to have some kind of mechanism around that, or if it became a problem, to consider after a certain amount of time putting a fee on it to encourage people not just taking up that space indefinitely and not letting other people use it.
Okay, so I think we've had some really good, robust discussions about this. Were there any further comments? How are people on the board feeling like they want to sort of digest this a little bit and think about it some more and come back maybe at next ZAC meeting and provide more thoughts?
I'll offer, I don't want to slow us down, but as I've already admitted, I missed this email from John. It sounds like everyone likes everything that's in there, but if people are open to it, I don't see any reason to vote today. I would love it to have a moment to read more deeply what I saw.
Rachel, I'd like to check in with some of the developers on South Street. I have a feeling that many of them are going to want to be putting EV charging stations in, but I'd like to get confirmation of that before we go forward. If in fact it's very expensive and it shies people away from Hopkinton, I think we should know that before voting on it.
But through the chair,
Mm-hmm.
just to respond to that, Ron, while you talk to them, I think it's important to be clear that the bylaw as proposed requires EV charging stations or the infrastructure, so that if the charging stations are prohibitively expensive, they can just put the infrastructure in and still comply. And the infrastructure is defined as conduit, anything else that needs to get the power from here to there without actually connecting the power.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Right. Okay. So unless I hear,
I just wanted to add something that's relevant to what you just said. There are currently and will be more incentives being offered to businesses putting in charging stations to encourage this. So I don't have the details off the top of my head, but that should just be taken into account if there is pushback. Those won't be here forever, but they are here now and more are coming. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think in the interest of time, John, let's move on to the next agenda item, which I believe is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
I only have one comment that I made before we officially came on air, which is Ron Foisey is only RF in the minutes.
I've been found out.
I don't know if I had to bring that up, John. I wasn't trying to publicly embarrass you. I just didn't know if we needed to make that part of the public
Yes.
meeting. So
It's an edit that needs to be made. So I will,
Okay.
I will make that edit.
I'd like to move to approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second that.
Great, okay. So we're ready to vote on the minutes. Mary Larson Marlowe,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ted Barker Hook,
Ted's a yes.
Ron Foisey,
Ron is a yes.
Curtis Smithson,
Curtis is yes.
Elise Smialowski,
Elise Mihailovsky, yes.
and Rachel Rawson is a yes. So can I have a motion to end the ZAC meeting for tonight?
So
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. Elise, since you seconded, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mary,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Ted,
Ted's a yes.
Curtis,
Curtis is yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Rachel is a yes. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being patient with me as I walk through all this fun
Great
stuff.
job.
You're great.
Great job.
Thanks,
You're
Rachel.
awesome.
Great job.
All right, take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.